Black CEO mocked by billionaire white family, then she cancels the $900M deal. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's video, I need your help. We've noticed that the channel is losing traction, and subscribing is one of the best ways you can help us. It's quick, free, and allows us to continue bringing you great content. Your support means everything. Let's keep this channel growing collectively. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to the story. Hey, Blackie, go serve the drinks. The words cracked through the chandelier-lit ballroom like a whip. They didn't fall quiet. They bounced, echoing in laughter across tuxedos and satin gowns. At the center of it all stood her, a black woman in a pale blush dress, phone pressed calmly to her ear, posture steady as marble. She didn't flinch. She didn't look down. She simply stood still, anchored while an ocean of eyes turned her into a spectacle. The woman who shouted it, blonde, flawless in navy silk, threw her head back and laughed. She jabbed a finger toward the woman in pink, as if pointing out a stain on perfection. Around her, family and friends roared, champagne flutes trembling in their hands. It was supposed to be funny, supposed to shrink her into service staff, supposed to remind her she didn't belong. But she didn't move. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in dignity and justice, hit like and subscribe. These stories spark change. And we're glad you're here. Now, back to her. The ballroom glittered in excess crystal chandeliers, dripping light like frozen rain, a string quartet brushing soft notes into the air, tables dressed in white linen and gold. It was the kind of wealth that liked to be seen, paraded. And in the middle of it, she was invisible by design. No designer label on her dress. No entourage. No introduction announced. Just a slim phone in her hand, eyes clear, spine straight. They thought she'd wandered in. They thought she was staff. They thought wrong. A young man in a tux leaned close to the blonde and whispered just loud enough, "She probably borrowed that dress. 900 million? That's more than her whole block could afford." Laughter again. A cruel, rolling wave. But she only shifted her weight, pressing one hand lightly against the table beside her. Not defensive, not shaken, just steady. The quartet kept playing, as if strings could soften the sting of prejudice. They couldn't. Across the room, a junior staffer, an actual server, tray trembling in his grip, froze. His jaw tightened. He had seen this before, too many times. He looked at her, then at them, and something in his eyes shifted. The blonde woman wasn't finished. "Sweetheart," she called across the floor, "if you're lost, the kitchen's that way." Gasps. Snickers. A toast raised high. The black woman exhaled once, long and quiet. She remembered nights like this, not here, not now, but years ago. 16, Charlotte, Sunday dress, escorted out of a hotel lobby because this area is for guests only. That sting never faded. Tonight, though, it wasn't about fading. Tonight was about revealing. Her phone stayed against her ear. Her silence wasn't surrender. It was the first crack in their certainty. The chandelier glowed brighter. Or maybe it was just the shift, the air no longer soft with music, but charged with something else. They thought they were laughing at a servant. In truth, they were mocking the woman who held the pen on a $900 million deal. And with one calm command, she was about to erase their entire empire. The laughter didn't fade. It lingered, spilling across polished marble and gilded mirrors. The ballroom was alive with the smug comfort of people convinced they owned the night. And she, still silent, still unshaken, was at the center of it. Her name was Maya Ellis, 41 years old, founder of Ellis Global Holdings, a portfolio that stretched across continents, 9 industries, and tonight a pending $900 million acquisition that would decide the fate of the very family now laughing at her. But no one in the room knew that, because Maya had come alone. No entourage, no assistant hovering at her shoulder. She wore no glittering diamonds, no obvious brand stitched into the seams of her dress. It was intentional. She wanted to see the room for what it really was, without the armor of reputation to shield her. To them, she was just a black woman who didn't belong. A man in a tux, son of the family patriarch, leaned back against the bar, smirk curling across his lips. She probably slipped past security. If she's pitching anything, it's coupons, not contracts. His words were bait, and the crowd bit down with glee. Maya lowered her phone, slipped it into her clutch. Her hands folded loosely in front of her. Every move was deliberate, controlled. She had learned decades ago that silence was louder than outrage, and composure more dangerous than rage. A server walked past, tray trembling with champagne. He slowed, eyes flicking between Maya and the laughing circle. He knew who the real staff were, and she wasn't one of them. Still, the family pressed on. The matriarch, draped in emerald silk, raised her glass. "Let's toast," she declared, "to keeping our deals in the right hands." Her voice rang like a gavel, polished, rehearsed. The circle erupted in cheers, crystal clinking against crystal. Maya didn't move, didn't drink. She had brought nothing but her presence. And it was already enough. Years of boardrooms, mergers, hostile negotiations, she had survived them all, but the sting of being underestimated never faded. She remembered 25, walking into her first venture pitch in Boston. A man in a gray suit told her, "Sweetheart, we don't fund daydreams." 2 years later, she bought his firm out of bankruptcy. Tonight had the same smell. Arrogance disguised as tradition. Prejudice wrapped in etiquette. The blonde woman who had shouted at her earlier sidled closer, lips curled into a mocking smile. "Sweetheart," she whispered, "if you're here for the auction, the charity tables are in the back." Maya's eyes flicked to her. Just once. A glance sharp enough to cut, but not a word followed. Silence, again, was its own language. And around her, the walls of laughter grew higher. They thought she was nobody. They thought she was out of place. They thought they were safe. But behind her stillness, behind that simple blush dress and quiet presence, sat authority they couldn't imagine. With one sentence, one phone call, she could dismantle their empire. And soon she would. The orchestra swelled, violins chasing the hum of voices, but it couldn't drown the words. Not anymore. The family moved as one, a circle tightening, a performance staged for the crowd. They weren't whispering now. They wanted the room to hear. The son, the one in the tux with the smirk, lifted his glass and called across the table, "900 million? That's bigger than your entire community's budget." He laughed, tilting his head toward his friends as if the punchline had landed. Their laughter followed, loud, ugly, triumphant. Maya didn't blink. Her hands remained folded, steady against the clutch resting at her waist. The matriarch leaned in next, voice sharp and polished. "We don't sign contracts with dreamers. This is legacy money, sweetheart. You need roots for that." She let the word roots linger, heavy, pointed. The crowd caught it, some gasping, others laughing all the louder. Maya's silence was a mirror, and the mirror unsettled them. The blonde woman, the one in navy silk who had first mistaken her for staff, stepped closer, emboldened. "You're wasting your time here," she sneered. "Deals like this aren't for people like you." She didn't whisper, she didn't hide. The words cut clean through the air like glass shattering. The ballroom shifted. Some eyes darted away. Others leaned in, hungry for the spectacle. At the back, the junior server froze mid-step. He looked down at the tray in his hands, then back at Maya. His throat bobbed as if he wanted to speak, but the weight of the room kept him still. The patriarch, the anchor of the family, delivered the final blow. He adjusted his cufflinks, straightened his shoulders, and declared in a voice meant to carry, "This meeting is over. We don't negotiate with fantasies. Come back when you own something real." The words dropped like a gavel. Final, irrefutable. A hush fell, brief but thick, before the blonde snatched the printed draft from the table pages of a deal worth nearly $1 billion and ripped it down the middle. Paper tore like fabric. She let the scraps fall onto the floor at Maya's feet. The crowd erupted again. Laughter, gasps, champagne spilling over the rims of flutes as toasts rose to mockery. Maya didn't move. Her gaze swept slowly across the circle, then past it to the room, to the staff, to the witnesses, who would remember this moment long after the chandeliers stopped glittering. Inside, a memory burned. 23 years old, fresh from her first acquisition attempt, told by a banker, "This isn't a place for you. Stick to smaller numbers." She had walked out humiliated that day. She never forgot. Now, standing in the glow of chandeliers and contempt, the words were almost the same. Almost. But she wasn't the same. The orchestra still played, but the music felt wrong, like it was scoring a tragedy no one asked for. Guests whispered at the edges of the room. Phones lifted subtly, recording behind champagne glasses. The story was no longer confined to the circle. It was leaking, spreading, and Maya, calm, steady, unshaken, waited, because escalation was never the end. It was only the beginning. Shredded pages littered the marble floor like fallen feathers, white against black stone. Laughter still clung to the chandeliers, but it was starting to sound forced, a little too sharp, a little too desperate. Maya Ellis did not move. Her hands rested lightly on her clutch, her chin lifted just enough to catch the glow of the chandeliers above. Her eyes traced the circle around her, slow, unhurried, unflinching. It was the kind of gaze that unsettled because it didn't break, didn't plead, didn't react the way they wanted. Silence was her answer. The blonde in navy tilted her head, confused by the lack of fight. "Cat got your tongue?" she prodded. Her smirk wavered when Maya didn't so much as blink. The patriarch cleared his throat, puffed up by his own authority. "That's what I thought," he said, as though her composure was submission, as though stillness meant defeat. But Maya's stillness wasn't weakness. It was strategy. At 26, she had stood in another boardroom, accused of forging collateral on a deal she had oversecured. They had pushed, mocked, threatened to blacklist her. She had said nothing then, too, until the numbers spoke for her. Silence had saved her that day. Tonight, it would cut sharper than any rebuttal. The orchestra played on, unaware. The violins trembled through a waltz that no one was dancing to anymore. The air had shifted less gala, more courtroom. Across the room, the junior server still held his tray frozen midair. He was staring at her now, wide-eyed, as if realizing what everyone else had missed. She wasn't breaking. She was holding. Waiting. The matriarch tapped her glass with a manicured nail, trying to reignite the performance. "Ignore her," she told the circle. "She's nobody. She's nothing." But even as she said it, her voice wavered, just a fraction. Because silence had weight, and Maya's silence was filling the room. Guests at the edges began to notice. A woman in red whispered to her husband, "She's not leaving." A man near the bar lowered his phone, almost disappointed there was no shouting match, no outburst, just a wall of calm that unnerved. The blonde tried again, voice rising this time. "Do you even hear us? You don't belong here. You don't belong at this table." Maya exhaled, slow and even. Her lips parted just enough to let a whisper escape. Not loud, not for them, but for herself. "I've heard it all before." It wasn't defiance shouted into the air. It was history carried in her bones, released like a reminder. This was not the first time, and it would not be the last. The laughter thinned. The circle shifted uncomfortably. The patriarch adjusted his cufflinks again, though they didn't need adjusting. Silence was doing what outrage never could. It was making them feel exposed. The orchestra's waltz faltered, one note sharp, as if even the musicians felt it. Maya's eyes finally moved to the shredded pages on the floor, then back up to the family that had thrown them. She didn't speak. She didn't need to, because sometimes the most dangerous sound in a room full of arrogance is no sound at all. The silence stretched, taut as a violin string on the edge of breaking. Maya Ellis remained motionless. The family remained loud, desperate laughter spilling into the air like champagne gone flat. But the rest of the ballroom shifted. It started at the edges. The junior server still stood rooted to the spot, tray trembling in his grip. His knuckles whitened around the stem of a glass flute. His eyes flicked between Maya and the family encircling her, and something inside him cracked. He stepped forward. It wasn't loud, it wasn't grand, but the tray clinked as he set it down on a side table, his voice barely above the music. "She's not staff," he said. The words landed like a pebble dropped into still water small, but the ripples spread. The blonde woman snapped her head around. "Excuse me?" The server swallowed hard, but his voice steadied. "She's not staff. I work here. I know who belongs in this uniform. She doesn't." A murmur rolled through the crowd. Guests turned their heads. Glasses hovered midair. Suddenly, people were watching not just the family's performance, but the cracks forming in it. The matriarch's smile faltered. "Keep serving, boy," she said, her tone sharp, dismissive. But the boy didn't move. "No, ma'am," he replied. "Not this time." The orchestra stumbled, a violin bow scraping the wrong note. The ballroom was no longer in rhythm. From the far corner, a woman in a red gown lifted her phone higher, now recording openly. Beside her, a man in a dark suit whispered, "This doesn't look right. Not at all." The patriarch's voice boomed, trying to seize control. "This is family business. Private. Step aside. But it wasn't private anymore. Not when cameras were rising, not when whispers were turning into words. The junior server's eyes found Maya's. He didn't know her name, didn't know her power, but he knew what he saw. Dignity standing against mockery. He straightened his shoulders just a fraction and repeated louder, "She doesn't work for you." Gasps. Shifts. The first fissure of doubt cutting through the room. Maya still hadn't spoken. She hadn't needed to. Her silence was drawing others out, pulling the truth into the open. The blonde sneered, voice higher now, strained. "Oh, please. She's just trying to sneak into our circle. And you're helping her?" The server held his ground. "I'm saying what's true." His voice shook, but his spine didn't. For the first time, the family looked unsettled, because arrogance feeds on silence, and silence, when broken, becomes something else entirely. Phones clicked. A lens flashed. Someone whispered, "Who is she?" And though Maya still hadn't answered, the question itself was a spark. The ballroom no longer belonged only to the family. It was shifting, inch by inch, toward her. The ripple of doubt had barely settled when the patriarch's voice slammed into the air like a hammer. Enough. It cut across the music, across the whispers, demanding the room bend back into his control. His jaw was tight, his cufflinks catching the chandelier light as he spread his hands wide. This is a family matter, a distraction, nothing more. But distractions didn't draw cameras. Distractions didn't stiffen the air until it hummed. And distractions didn't hold their ground in silence the way Maya Ellis did. The blonde woman spun on the junior server, eyes blazing. "Put that tray back in your hands before you lose your job," she hissed. Her words were loud enough for the crowd, pitched to humiliate him as she had tried to humiliate Maya. But the boy didn't move. His defiance, small as it was, ignited murmurs from the corners. The matriarch took her turn, voice sharpened into venom. 900 million, she said, drawing out every syllable like it was absurd, laughable. "Do you understand what that number even means? That's legacy wealth, generations of building, not something a passerby could ever touch." The word passerby landed heavy, coated with dismissal and disdain. The son leaned in, laughter dripping from his tongue. "She probably printed something off the internet and thought it looked official. That's what this is, fantasy dressed up as fact." The circle laughed with him, loud, sharp, almost frantic this time. It wasn't joy, it was desperation, disguised as humor. Maya still hadn't spoken. Her stillness unsettled them more than any outburst could have. The patriarch leaned closer now, his voice lower but sharper, like a blade pressed against skin. "Listen carefully. People like you don't sit at this table. You never have. You never will. And the sooner you understand that, the sooner you'll stop embarrassing yourself." Gasps flared at the edges of the room. The words weren't coded anymore. They weren't veiled. They were naked, brutal, undeniable. The junior server's tray rattled where it sat, abandoned. His hands curled into fists, but he wasn't alone. From another table, a guest muttered, "That's too far." Another lifted her phone, lens steady, no longer pretending to hide it. The matriarch caught the motion. "Put those away," she snapped. "This is private business." But it wasn't. Not anymore. The laughter rang thinner, sharper, but the malice grew louder. The blonde swept her arm toward Maya, dismissive, final. "Security should have handled this already. Why is she still standing here?" The orchestra faltered again, bows hanging mid-air. Maya remained still, her silence louder than their noise. Her eyes held steady, her breath even, as though she'd been here before, because she had. And in that stillness, the balance of the ballroom shifted once more, not toward the family's control, but toward the storm they didn't see coming. The patriarch's words still hung in the air when his son reached for the table. The draft agreement printed neatly, bound in a leather folder, lay open among champagne flutes and silver trays. With one quick theatrical motion, he snatched it up. "This?" he said, waving the pages like a prop. "This is what she came for? A fantasy dressed in paperwork?" And before anyone could stop him, he tore the folder straight down the spine. The sound was sharp, violent, louder than the orchestra's strings. Paper ripped, scattering like snow across polished marble. Pages fluttered to the floor at Maya's feet, crumpling under patent leather shoes and satin heels. Gasps rose from the edges of the room. Phones lifted higher. The blonde clapped her hands together, mocking applause. "There. That's all this is worth. Confetti for the floor." The matriarch leaned back, satisfied, as if the tearing of paper was enough to erase possibility itself. "Meeting adjourned," she announced. Her voice rang cold, final. The patriarch wasn't finished. He jabbed a finger toward Maya, his voice swelling with arrogance. "Security!" he barked, his call echoing across the ballroom. "Escort her out, now," the blonde added louder, "before she steals the silverware." "Oh." Laughter rolled through the family circle, but it didn't spread as far this time. The sound thinned at the edges, clashing with the gasps, the whispers, the steady whir of cameras recording everything. From the back doors, 2 uniformed guards appeared. Their steps were deliberate, heavy against the marble. They didn't rush, they didn't need to. The order had been given. Maya's eyes followed them, calm, steady. She didn't flinch when they drew closer. She didn't move when the circle smirked wider, certain the end was near. She had seen this before too. 29, San Francisco. Pulled aside by security at a shareholders' meeting she had organized. They asked if she was lost. She had answered with her name, with her title, with proof they couldn't ignore. Tonight, she didn't plan to answer at all. The junior server stepped forward again, voice shaking. "She hasn't done anything." One of the guards shot him a look, sharp enough to cut. "Back off." But the boy didn't. His chest rose and fell, fast but firm. "You can't throw her out. She's done nothing wrong." The patriarch barked a laugh, low and cruel. "She's done the one thing that matters. She existed where she shouldn't." The words landed heavy, ugly, undeniable. The kind of words that left no veil, no excuse. The guards closed in. Maya inhaled once, deeply, grounding herself in the weight of it. The sting of humiliation, the scent of arrogance, the sight of power misused. The ballroom wasn't quiet anymore. It was charged. Witnesses leaned forward. Cameras stayed steady. The performance was cracking, shifting into something else. And as the guards reached for her, the storm was ready to break. The guards were only a step away when Maya Ellis moved. Not a flinch, not a retreat, just a single, precise gesture, her hand sliding into the clutch at her side and lifting her phone back into view. The room froze. She pressed the screen once. A soft chime rang out, clean, crisp, undeniable. And when she spoke, her voice was low even, but it carried like steel through glass. "Proceed with cancellation," she said. Every syllable was deliberate, calm, inevitable. The guards hesitated. Their steps faltered mid-stride. They didn't understand what they'd heard, but the family did, or at least, they felt it. The blonde laughed, brittle around the edges. "Cancellation? What are you canceling, darling? Your reservation at the buffet." Her laugh rang false, sharp, like glass cracking under pressure. Maya didn't look at her. She didn't look at any of them. Her eyes were fixed on the phone, on the voice that answered instantly from the other end. "Confirmed," a woman's voice replied, smooth, professional, amplified just enough for those closest to hear. "Clause 7 initiated. 900 million terminated. Effective immediately." The words didn't shout. They didn't need to. They landed like thunder muffled under velvet soft, but world-shaking. The matriarch blinked, her polished smile faltering. "What? Did she just say?" The patriarch's face drained of color. His mouth opened, then closed, searching for footing that no longer existed. "That's impossible," he muttered. The son barked a laugh, forced, nervous. "She's bluffing. She doesn't have that kind of authority." But the silence that followed betrayed him, because everyone in the room had heard the voice on the phone. Crisp, corporate, unshaken. From the corner, the woman in red whispered into her own recording, "She just canceled 900 million. Did you hear that?" The junior server stood taller now, voice firmer. "She's not bluffing." The guards froze entirely, their orders suspended in midair. They weren't trained for this humiliation, yes. Removal, yes. But the weight of money, of power this scale, that was beyond their pay grade. The blonde tried again, her words sharper, desperate. "Don't listen to her. She's faking it, just trying to scare us." But the room wasn't laughing anymore. The crowd wasn't smiling. Phones were raised, whispers buzzing like electricity. The story had shifted. Maya lowered the phone slowly, deliberate, every motion precise. She finally looked at them, at the matriarch, the patriarch, the son, the blonde. One by one, her gaze pinned them in place. And though her voice was still calm, it no longer sounded like silence. It sounded like judgment. "I told you, she said softly. "I've heard this all before, but tonight, I'm the one writing the ending." The chandeliers glittered overhead, but the glow was different now. It wasn't triumph shining down on the family. It was spotlight exposing them, cornering them, leaving them nowhere to hide. And for the first time, it wasn't Maya standing alone in that ballroom. It was them. The ballroom had gone still. Champagne glasses hovered mid-air, their bubbles rising soundless in the charged silence. The shredded contract lay scattered across the marble like white ash. And at the center of it all stood Maya Ellis, calm as stone, phone lowered to her side. She let the silence stretch, let it thicken until every breath in the room felt too loud. Then she spoke. "You keep asking who I am," she said evenly, her voice cutting clean through the hush. "So let me answer." The patriarch's eyes narrowed, but he didn't speak. Not now. Maya lifted her chin, her words deliberate, sharp. "I'm not staff. I'm not a guest who wandered into the wrong room. I am Maya Ellis, founder and CEO of Ellis Global Holdings, the fund controlling the very contract you just tore apart." Gasps erupted, sharp as shattered glass. Phones clicked. A woman in red nearly dropped her camera. The matriarch's smile collapsed into a thin line. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "No, that's not—" Maya's gaze fixed on her, steady as a blade. "You called me a dreamer. You called me a passerby. You called me nothing. But tonight, I was the one holding the pen. I came here not to win your approval, but to see if your family deserved to keep 900 million of our capital." Her words landed heavy, each syllable pressing deeper than the last. "And now," she continued, calm as ever, "you don't." "I." The blonde staggered a step back, the navy silk of her gown suddenly looking cheap under the chandeliers. "You can't—" "I already did," Maya interrupted, her tone final, irrevocable. The sun tried to laugh, but it cracked, brittle, a sound more desperate than amused. "She's lying. She has to be lying." But the junior server, still standing near the circle, shook his head. His voice was clear now, certain. "She's not lying. I believe her." "Ugh." The crowd murmured louder, fragments of awe and disbelief weaving together. "Ellis Global, she owns it? 900 million, gone just like that. Did they really just mock the investor herself?" The patriarch sank back into his chair, as though the weight of the chandelier light had finally crushed him. His authority evaporated, every ounce of control slipping through his clenched fists. Maya's eyes swept across the room, taking in every face, every raised phone, every whisper. "You wanted me out of this ballroom," she said softly, voice sharp as a verdict. "But what you never understood is that this ballroom was already mine." The chandeliers blazed overhead, brighter than ever, but the spotlight wasn't on the family anymore. It was on her, and for the first time, the laughter was gone. For a long breath, no one moved. The chandeliers hummed with light, violins faltered to silence, and the only sound was the ragged breath of the family who had believed they owned the room. Then the cracks spread. The blonde stumbled backward, her heels skidding against the marble. The confidence she had worn like perfume evaporated, leaving only the sharp, acrid scent of fear. She's bluffing," she stammered, though her eyes never left Maya's. The matriarch clutched her emerald silk as though fabric could shield her. "This is a misunderstanding," she whispered, but the whisper was too thin, too brittle, swallowed by the rising murmur of the crowd. The son's smirk collapsed into panic. His eyes darted to the scattered pages on the floor, then to the dozens of phones recording every twitch of his face. He lifted a hand as if to stop them, but it was useless. He had already become content. The patriarch, the anchor of their arrogance, sank deeper into his chair. His hands fumbled at the table, searching for control, for words, for anything that could pull the power back. None came. The ballroom had turned. Guests whispered openly now, no longer hiding behind their champagne. "Did you hear? She owns the deal. They mocked her, then lost 900 million. I can't believe I witnessed this." The woman in red stepped forward, phone raised high, her voice carrying. "Everyone here saw what happened. Every word, every insult, every laugh. And now we know who she is." The junior server stood taller, shoulders squared. For the first time all night, he wasn't invisible. "I told you," he said, voice strong, ringing across the room. "She doesn't work for you. She never did." The crowd murmured louder, shifting, aligning not with the family, but with her. The air buzzed, charged, alive, with the unmistakable scent of justice rising. The blonde's hands trembled at her sides. "You can't just take it away," she pleaded, the edge of mockery gone, replaced by panic. "You can't just—" Maya's gaze cut to her, calm, steady. She didn't speak. She didn't have to. The silence itself was a verdict. The patriarch tried one last time, voice cracking. "This room, this family, we built this legacy. You can't erase it." Maya's lips curved, not a smile, but something sharper, colder. "I didn't erase it," she replied evenly. "You did." Gasps scattered like sparks. The words landed. Final, undeniable. The family had lost the room, lost the deal, lost the story. And Maya hadn't raised her voice once. The ballroom was already broken open, the family exposed. But Maya Ellis wasn't finished. She raised her phone again, her movements slow, deliberate, every gesture carrying the weight of inevitability. The crowd leaned in. Even the chandeliers seemed to flicker lower, as though the room itself was holding its breath. "Carla," she said calmly into the phone. Her voice cut through the air like a bell. A pause. Then a crisp reply carried into the hushed ballroom. "Standing by, Miss Ellis." The matriarch clutched at her pearls. The son shook his head violently, muttering, "No, no, no." Maya's eyes stayed locked on the patriarch. Her words were steady, final. "Terminate all pending agreements with the Vance family. Effective immediately. Freeze their access to Ellis Global's accounts, privileges, and holdings." The patriarch's face drained. "You wouldn't—" "I already have," Maya interrupted. The voice on the phone confirmed, calm and merciless. "Orders logged. Systems updated. Access revoked." A chime echoed from somewhere, a notification ping, soft but devastating. The son yanked his phone from his pocket, scrolling desperately, his face crumbling as numbers shifted red across the screen. "It's gone," he whispered hoarsely. "It's all gone." The blonde staggered, grasping at the edge of the table. This isn't real." The crowd surged with murmurs, shock spilling into awe. Guests raised their phones higher, capturing not just humiliation, but history. Maya lowered her phone, her gaze sweeping across the room one final time. "You mocked me for existing at your table," she said. "So I ended the table itself." The words hit like a gavel, like the closing of a steel door. The junior server stepped forward again, voice trembling but proud. "You didn't just end it," he said. "You showed all of us what power looks like." The patriarch slammed his fist onto the table, a hollow sound, stripped of authority. "This isn't justice," he spat. Maya's reply was quiet, sharp enough to cut glass. "It's accountability, and it's overdue." Phones captured every word, every look, every tremor of collapse. The story was no longer theirs to control. It belonged to the witnesses, to the world beyond the ballroom. The family's empire had been dismantled in less than a night. No shouting, no spectacle, just a calm verdict from the woman they tried to erase. And nothing they could do would reverse it. The ballroom no longer belonged to the family. It belonged to silence, to the witnesses, to the weight of what had just unfolded. Shredded contracts still clung to the marble like pale ghosts, reminders of a billion-dollar deal reduced to scraps by arrogance. Maya Ellis stood at the center, composed as ever. She didn't gloat. She didn't smile. She simply lifted her gaze to the family who had mocked her, stripped them of everything they thought untouchable, and spoke one last time. "You thought tonight was yours," she said quietly, her voice steady enough to carry. "But this room doesn't measure legacy in crystal or chandeliers. It measures it in dignity, and that's something your wealth could never buy." The matriarch's shoulders sagged, emerald silk pooling like defeat. The son slumped against the bar, scrolling his phone in disbelief. The blonde stared blankly, mascara smudged at the corners of her eyes. The patriarch sat frozen, cufflinks gleaming uselessly as his empire crumbled around him. Maya turned toward the guests, toward the witnesses who had watched cruelty transform into justice. "Remember this moment," she told them. "Because silence does not mean submission. Sometimes silence is the storm before the reckoning." Gasps turned to murmurs. Murmurs swelled into applause, not loud, not raucous, but steady, reverent, the kind of sound that marked respect, not spectacle. The junior server, still standing tall, added the final note. "She didn't raise her voice once," he said to no one in particular, though half the room heard him. And she still changed everything. Maya gathered her clutch, stepping past the shredded papers, past the trembling family, past the cameras that would carry this story far beyond the ballroom. Her heels clicked against the marble, measured, unhurried, each step like a period closing the chapter. At the doors, she paused, turned back just once, her eyes locked with the patriarch's, holding him there in the ruins of his authority, and with a voice calm as judgment itself, she delivered the final line. I don't need to record what happened tonight. I am the record, and you will live with it. The chandeliers blazed one last time as she walked out, leaving silence, wreckage, and justice in her wake. The ballroom exhaled, the story was over. But its echoes were only beginning.